All right, we're live. It's Wednesday night here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We talk all Pitt sports here on the number one Rivals affiliated Pitt YouTube channel. So, pretty cool. Don't know if there are any other Rivals affiliated. Darn it, I shouldn't have given away the joke, right? You either get it or you don't. But it's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's the Panther-Lair Show. We do it every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel while you're here. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and then you'll never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. You turn on notifications, you'll get an alert for when we go live, sent right to your phone. It says, hey, Panther-Lair.com is going live right now, either at 8:30 on a Wednesday night for our live show or after a game for our post-game show. You also get a notification every morning, Monday through Friday, when we post the new Morning Pitt video, which we do every day of the week. I mean, Monday through Friday at least. No weekend shows, but Monday through Friday we post a new Morning Pitt, just kind of talking about everything going on in the world of Pitt. Today we had a video about Pitt's defense. Hasn't been good enough, through the first 6 games. And we have, and this is probably something we'll talk about a lot tonight, but we have a substantial sample size for this Pitt football team in 2022. I mean, we've seen 6 games now. It's half the season, literally half the season. Only 2 ACC games, but still half the season. 4 Power 5 opponents. Like I say, 2 ACC games and 6 games total. I mean, I think you have an idea of who you are. And while there are certain caveats and different kind of wrinkles we can throw in, well, this or that, or they didn't have this guy for a while, or they didn't have that guy for a while, and they weren't really this, or they weren't really any of those things. At 6 games, you kind of know who you are, and you kind of know who you're going to be for the next 6 games. And change, there's always potential for change. Guys could get hurt, or guys could get healthy, or guys could just play better. Level of competition changes. There's any number of reasons why the final 6 games will look different from the first 6. But in terms of knowing who the team is and knowing who the players are, I mean, I think at this point. And so on our Morning Pitt video today, we asked a simple question: is Pitt's defense good enough? Has Pitt's defense been good enough? And we looked at a bunch of different stats, and we looked at the eyeball test, and we looked at, anecdotally, and well, sometimes they were good at this, or sometimes they were bad at that. And we talked a lot about the run defense. We talked a lot about the lack of production out of the defensive ends. And we covered a lot of ground. You know what I mean? We talked about a lot of things regarding the defense, and to the question of, has Pitt's defense been good enough? I don't know if we really came to a conclusive answer. I'm not sure I really came out of it with a definitive answer. I mean, I think they've been good enough to go 4-2. I would say the defense has been good enough to go 5-1, to be quite honest. They gave up 34 to Tennessee, but that included overtime. I think for the most part, I think they played well enough to win against Georgia Tech. First of all, you give up 26 points. I mean, you played well enough to win. But when you only gave up 12 points, or 9 points through the first 3 quarters, 12 points through the first 3 quarters plus, I mean, I think you've played well enough to win. And a little more offensive success, a little more offensive time of possession, a few more offensive points, taking some of the pressure off the defense, probably would have changed the outcome of that game. And so overall, I would say Pitt's defense has been good enough. I mean, obviously they've been good enough, like I said, for a 4-2 record and potentially 5-1. But there are still some concerning factors, like the run defense, like the pass rush production, that probably are a little bit below the standards of what this defense wants to be, what it's tried to be, and largely what it has been. I mean, particularly over the last few years. I mean, this defense has excelled at stopping the run, and they've excelled at getting to the passer, and those things haven't necessarily been as consistently effective this year as they were certainly last season, or maybe even the years before that. A couple of years before that, before the Narduzzi defense really settled into its groove over the last 3 seasons or so, 3.5 seasons. I would say the second half of 2018, and then 19, 20, and 21, you got pretty consistently good performances out of the defense. There was a clunker every now and then. They got shredded by Clemson and Notre Dame in 2020. But on the whole, the defense was pretty good in those games. I think played well enough to win in, pretty much 9 out of 11 games that season. 2019, I would say largely the same thing, although, Eastern Michigan kind of gave them a bit more of the business than they probably anticipated. 2000 and last season, I mean, there wasn't much in the way of defensive breakdowns. I mean, the Western Michigan game, that was the clunker. Like I say, you kind of get one of those clunkers every now and then. And the Western Michigan game last season was certainly it. The Miami game, at least for the first quarter, a little bit like the Wake Forest game in the first quarter, where it looked like the defense had no clue what was going on and they were going to play as sloppy as possible. But they pretty much locked it down after that against Miami, and obviously locked it down after that against Wake Forest. So defense, I think, has been pretty consistently good for the better part of the last 3.5 seasons. But this year, I think, while they've largely played well enough to win, I think they've shown enough cracks that you can be a little bit concerned that if those cracks aren't sort of fixed, if those issues aren't taken care of, you're going to have some bigger problems. So we talked a lot about that on the Morning Pit today. If you missed it, yesterday we talked a lot about some of the offensive stuff, offensive personnel. I feel like there are a lot of offensive topics to tackle. We'll probably talk about a lot of them tonight. But yesterday we really focused sort of on personnel and also dove deep into Gavin Bartholomew's usage. I don't think anybody, I don't think anybody has, what's the right way to say it? I think most Pitt fans and most people who watched this team last year are probably a little surprised at Gavin Bartholomew's usage. 17 targets through 6 games. He's been a little banged up. He's been a little hurt. But that's still sort of a surprising total. Less than 3 targets per game. Turning into 14 catches. I think a couple touchdowns. The biggest thing I would say about Gavin Bartholomew, and what I said on the Morning Pit yesterday, is the change in usage, where you look at him averaging 7.6 yards of depth per target. His average depth of target this season is 7.6 on his 17 targets. Last year it was like 1.8, and that's not an exaggeration. It was less than 2 yards per target downfield when he caught the ball, or when the ball was thrown to him. And that illustrates, I think, the difference in how Gavin Bartholomew is being used this season. So we talked a lot about that yesterday, in addition to some other offensive personnel things. Didn't really get into Jalen Barden. I didn't mention him, and I should, because his usage, it boggles my mind. I don't get it. It must be a case where the coaches don't like what they're seeing in practice, I guess. But, I mean, he's shown the ability. He has the speed to take the top off a defense. He's as much of a vertical threat as anyone on the team, and yet he cannot get on the field. I mean, he cannot find his way onto the field, and it's almost mind-boggling that he can't. When you look at how this offense, this passing game in particular, has needed a spark, and a guy who could potentially provide one is just AWOL. I mean, not even AWOL, but just on a milk carton. Didn't even suit up. Wasn't even in uniform on Saturday, presumably due to injury, I guess. And it's just it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, and particularly it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It seems like he should be able to do more and contribute more and get more opportunities than he has so far this season. And I didn't talk about that as much as I wanted to. I actually wanted to talk a little more about Jalen Barden on yesterday's Morning Pit, but I didn't get around to doing it. But it all is sort of, where we're at right now on this Wednesday of October 12th. It's sort of, it just fits really well with this off week in the middle of the season, where we recap the last 6 and look ahead to the next 6. And what do we learn from the first half of the season? What do they need to improve on and obviously carry over to the second half of the season? And I think, maybe even on more of a bigger picture, and I'll put this out to everybody in the comment section, the chat screen right now. If you ever comment your question, you can put it on the whatchamacallit. Put it in the chat, and we will answer your questions and get your comments and respond to those. I think on the bigger picture, it's a question of where your expectations are for this team now. You've watched half the season. You've seen them play 6 games. Where are your expectations for Pitt football at this point in the 2022 season? We all talked in August about our expectations for the season as a whole, But now that you've watched 6 games, how have your expectations changed? And for me, yeah, I predicted a 10-2 record. I did. I thought they would lose one of the 2 Power 5 non-conference games, which they did. And I thought they would probably lose one in the ACC, which they have. So my 10-2 prediction pretty much forces them to run the table the rest of the way, which would mean winning 7 games in a row. And you've heard me talk about this before. I've gone down this path a lot of times, whether it was talking about Miami last season, and after Pitt lost to Miami, it was just this guaranteed lock that Miami was gonna run the table and win the Coastal. And I said, well, let's hold off, because for them to do that, they would need to win like 8 games in a row or 10 games in a row or something like that. And that's not an easy thing to do unless you have really elite talent that can kind of overcome the mistakes that end up costing teams games at some point during a season. And of course, I think Miami lost like the next week or 2 weeks after that or something. And I forget where I set the bar, because I looked into it last year of like how difficult it is to win 6 games in a row or 8 games in a row. I forget what the number I looked up, but it was like 6 or 8. And ultimately, that's what Pitt's going to have to do if they're going to win out and go 10-2. I don't know if that's feasible. I could see them. I mean, like, I think they're capable of going like 5-1 over this stretch, which would be a 9-3 record, a 6-2 record in the ACC, and that'd be a pretty good season. I mean, that would be a pretty good performance to go 9-3 overall and 6-2 in the conference. Disappointing because of the loss to Georgia Tech, a loss that they shouldn't have. That sort of, mind-boggling loss, that clunker of a game. But still, a 9-win season would be pretty good. And I think if they're able to finish the season going 6-1, if they go 5-1 in the final 6 games, which would be a 6-1 record over their final 7, I mean, I think that would be pretty strong work. I think everyone would rightfully feel probably pretty good about it. Now, certainly that would mean there's a loss in those final 6. And anytime there's a loss, I mean, we reconsider the value of even having a football program to begin with. That's the nature of fan discourse. But overall, if they get to the end of that Miami game and, win or lose, they end up 9-3, I have to think most people would take that. Now, if it ends up being that they go into the Miami game at 9-2, and they have a chance to win that game to finish 7-1 in the ACC and 10-2 overall, if by chance the Coastal Division is riding on that game and they end up losing it, that 9-3 will ring a little more hollow. Will feel a little less inspirational or encouraging if that keeps them out of Charlotte. Now, it might still end up with them going to, a decent bowl at 9-3. Which would be good, an opportunity to get to 10 wins and you'd win 21 games over the course of 2 seasons. I mean, that would be a pretty good stretch for Pitt. But they obviously have some things they have to figure out between now and then. If they're going to win 5 of these games, they're going to have to solve a few problems. And obviously the first problem they have to solve, the biggest problem they have to solve, is the passing game. And I can't sit here and tell you I know what the solutions are. I know that they're not as simple as Slovis has to throw it deeper downfield or they have to change the quarterbacks. I think Kedon Slovis needs to get better. If I was going to sum up the issues with the passing game and say what they need to fix this week or where they need to improve or what needs to change in the second half of the season, Kedon Slovis needs to play at a higher level. And it's as simple as that. And I went back and forth so many times over and over, earlier in the season, talking about, it was this or it was that or it was the receivers or it was the offensive line. And I think initially I talked about the receivers. The receivers just weren't getting the right spots. The receivers weren't running the right routes. The receivers weren't sharp enough. Their details they weren't on point. And Pat Narduzzi was saying stuff about that. And I think there's probably some truth to that. I think they were having unreliable performances, inconsistent performances from the receivers. Pat Narduzzi planted the seeds for that before the West Virginia game when he said the receiving core was giving him chest pains, right? And so I said, well, maybe that's a big part of it. And then when you got sort of later in the season, started talking about how, well, the offensive line, the pass blocking, just not that good, and they haven't had all those returning starters. They haven't had them all together at any point, and that's really been a letdown. But after this Virginia Tech game, where pressure, I don't think really was a problem. I don't think there was all that much pressure on Kedon Slovis. And obviously the running games were going really well in that game. And so you didn't need to throw for a lot. And he threw less than 30 passes. And yet it's still, I didn't expect him to complete 15 passes for 320 yards. But it's hard. I think anyone who watched that game would come away saying, boy, the quarterback didn't play very well. And I think at this point, it comes down to his level of play. And it comes down to what he has done so far. And it comes down to him not being decisive, not acting quickly, hesitating too much. And those were things we chalked up to the receiver issues or the pressure or pass protection issues. And I think those things are still at play here. I think those are still things we have to consider. But ultimately, he needs to make better decisions. He needs to make those decisions quicker. And he needs to act with some decisiveness. I hope we get a chance to talk to Frank Cignetti next week, Pitt's offensive coordinator. They give us 2 assistant coaches each week for media opportunities. And those are predetermined, and they're chosen, and they're sort of handed to us. And we haven't gotten Frank Cignetti in season yet. We had him before the West Virginia game, and we had him on media day at the beginning of August. We haven't had him for an in-season media opportunity yet. And I hope he comes out next week because I want to ask him about this concept that he always used to talk about in 2009 and 2010 of decisive decisions, of making decisive decisions. And I mean, I've talked about this on the Morning Pit. I used to chuckle about it. Ha, ha, ha. What a silly phrase. But the reality is, it makes a lot of sense. And I think when you watch Kedon Slovis, you'd say he's not being decisive. He's not being decisive enough. He's not making decisive decisions. And it makes sense, even if it's sort of a silly, redundant phrase, it makes sense when you watch him play that that's not happening. And it needs to happen. He needs to pull the trigger quicker. He needs to make those decisions quicker. He needs to process the information, know where he's going with the ball, and hit it. And if he's unable to do that on, through like a 3 or 4 read progression, then Frank Cignetti this week has to cut those progressions down. Cut the field in half if you have to. Make a 2 read offense. 1, 2, run. You know what I mean? 1, 2, throw it away. 1, 2, tuck it in and run for a couple yards. And if that's what it has to be, then that's what it has to be. But you need to find a way to get the ball out quicker, to get the ball downfield, and to get these receivers more involved than they have been. I still think there's talent in this receiving corps. And this has been a debate in the last few weeks and really throughout the season. And while I don't think the receivers have played great, I still think there's talent in the group. I think Jared Wayne is really good. That hasn't changed. Jared Wayne has been who Jared Wayne is and just sort of steadily progressed and gotten better over the course of the last 4 seasons. And I think he's good. I think Konate Mumpfield is really good. I do. And I think there are some varying opinions about him. Part of it is that he didn't play last week, so it's been a while since we've seen him in action. Nobody really did anything very good against Georgia Tech, but I think he is a really good player. I don't think what he did at Akron was a fluke. And I think he can be a really good player for this offense. I think Bub Means has a role. I think he's had a tough go of it. Things haven't always gone his way. He's been inconsistent. But I still think he can have a role. I think Jaden Bradley can have a role. I think Gavin Bartholomew is somebody you want to get the ball to. I've said my piece on Jalen Barton. You know what I think about him. There are good receivers on this team, good receiving targets on this team. There are guys that are worth throwing to. And Kedon Slovis has to get the ball to them. You should hand off to Izzy Benakanda a lot. He should get the ball a lot, as much as you possibly can. But you're obviously going to have to attack through the air, and I think they've got the weapons to do it. I think the pass protection has gotten a little better. Like I say, I think it was better against Virginia Tech. I think as you continue to successfully run it, you're going to continue to have more success dropping back with less pressure, particularly when you run play action. And I think, I think it's not a perfect situation for Kedon Slovis, but it's good enough that he should be able to have more success and be more effective than he has been thus far. And what he does and how he improves is going to be the key to the rest of this season. Because a step forward from Kedon Slovis could potentially lead to like a 5-1 record in the final 6. No progress, or God forbid a step back, and you could be looking at like a 3-3 record. You could be looking at a 7-5 season, which would be a major, major disappointment. And I'm not just saying that as someone who picked him to go 10-2, but to go from an 11-win ACC championship season to 7-5, it would be a major, major disappointment. And, you'd be left facing some real questions. I think, and the answer to most of those questions would be the quarterback play. And you know what? This is what we said all summer. It's what I said all spring. It's what we said all summer, that this team would go where the quarterback took them. And that this team's success would be tied to Kedon Slovis. And if he played well, the team would do well. And if he didn't, the team would be average. They'd win 7 or 8 games. 8 games would be the floor. I mean, I don't, I think if you go below 8 games, you're in real trouble. 8 wins. And now they've put themselves in a spot where they need to go 4-2 in the final 6 just to get to 8 wins. So it's not an ideal situation. They should be 5-1 right now. But they blew the Georgia Tech game. They wasted an opportunity right there because the offense still hadn't figured itself out. You've got an off week now to try and figure those things out. You've got an off week now to resolve those situations and resolve those issues. And we'll see what kind of work they put in. We'll find out in a week and a half when they go to Louisville and, start this second half of the season, which is not a murderer's row of opponents, but Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech weren't a murderer's row either, and Pitt lost one game and won the other by 2 scores. So Pitt is in the top half of the Coastal Division, I think, just in overall talent and team ability. But they're not so far ahead that they can't fall to other teams in the division. They can't they can't overlook anyone, I guess is what I'm saying. Apple cider tonight. In case you were curious what that was, that's apple cider. It's fall, so you got to get into the spirit of things. It being fall. I want to get into the I want to get into the chat section, take some of your comments and some of your questions. But of course, I want to tell you about our friend Chris Gates. I've told you about Chris Gates for a while now. ChrisGatesFitness.com. He's an online fitness coach from Pittsburgh. He's a big Pitt fan, and he works with people all over the world to build muscle, burn fat, and improve their health through fitness and nutrition. And if you follow Chris on Twitter, or if you checked out his stuff, or you've heard me talk about him before, I just really appreciate Chris and his commitment to fitness and nutrition. That, the way to get healthy, the way to build muscle, the way to burn fat, the way to improve your health is through your fitness and your nutrition. That there's no shortcuts, and you just put in some work and you can accomplish the goals you're looking for. The way Chris does it, he does it online, and he guides and supports his clients every step of the way. So you just show up, you put in the work, you have confidence that what you're doing is working. And if you mention Panther-Lair when you apply, you go to ChrisGatesFitness.com. And you apply for a month of coaching or apply for online coaching. If you mention Panther-Lair, you get 75% off your first month of coaching. I mean, look, if you can get 75% off of anything, it's worth a try. And this is something that's actually going to help your life and improve your life through health and fitness and nutrition. So ChrisGatesFitness.com. Chris, C-H-R-I-S, simple name to spell, Gates, G-A-T-E-S, fitness.com. Go there, check it out, and see what Chris is up to. He's got a lot of free content on his site, actually. And if you want to sign up for the online coaching, like I said, mention Panther-Lair, you get a 75% off your first month. ChrisGatesFitness.com. Big Pitt fan, Chris is, and we thank him for his support of the show. He always watches the show. He actually he asked a question about recruiting. We'll get to that in a little bit, but because I think I saw him in the chat screen as well. And so we'll check out his questions there and see what he's got to say. Listen, if you want to be a super chatter, like Bill Florigen, You can click that $ down at the bottom of the chat screen. You can, support the podcast with a couple bucks. We appreciate that, and we'll definitely make sure we get to your comment and your question. Bill says, I came out of the Tennessee game feeling a little disappointed, but high on the offense, especially what I saw in the first half. Was that an aberration with Kedon Slovis? Did he become gun shy, or is it scheme? So, I mean, there's a couple things at play there. There probably are issues in the scheme. I think there are probably things that are maybe a little predictable, either in the play calling or the play design. I do think... Look, I think he was holding onto the ball in the West Virginia game, and that was maybe chalked up to the wide receivers and the way they were running the routes and how they were, their details and how sharp they were being. The Tennessee game, he was letting it fly, holding onto it still, but letting it fly for that first half that he played, and then he got knocked out of the game. And I don't know if I'd say he's been gun shy since then, but he does seem reluctant to pull the trigger, which kind of sounds like it's almost the exact same thing as being gun shy. Look, I don't know. I don't know if he had a concussion or something like that coming out of that Tennessee game. It seems like that was the indication. All signs sort of point toward that. Does that lead to a guy being a little bit skittish on the field or a little bit nervous or always kind of hearing footsteps or, just hesitant to pull the trigger? I think he's very risk averse. I think he's, the Pac-12 all-time leader in career completion percentage. I think he's like top 15 or something like that nationally all time in the history of college football in career completion percentage. He's a very accurate passer, and I think most of that accuracy is still there. I think you can see it. I think you can see that he's got a big arm. I think he can throw the ball downfield. I think he can be accurate with his passes. The problem is the hesitation. The problem is the lack of being decisive. The problem is the issue of the issues with dropping back, making the reads, and getting rid of the ball. And that just hasn't. It hasn't happened for him. And I mean, there's probably some scheme things that can be adjusted to improve that. But overall, I mean, I think it's got to be improvement with him. Look, receivers can be better. Pass protection can be better. Scheme can be improved. But he's got to make the biggest step forward himself. It's really going to come down to what Kedon Slovis can do and how much he can improve. Jesus Loves Comics says, I love this channel. I watch every episode Monday through Friday. Let's go Pitt. Thanks, Chris, for posting content even after we pitted it to Georgia Tech. Now we are back in business and have, I think the word you're trying to say is legitimate shot to fight Clemson for the ACC crown. Look, I think it's highly unlikely they win the ACC championship again. I think they've got a shot to get back to Charlotte. I think it's going to be tough to win that game. If you put a gun to my head, am I betting on them going back to Charlotte? Probably not. If you put a gun to my head, am I betting on them winning the ACC championship game? Definitely not. But if you put a gun to my head and said, are you going to bet on them going back to Charlotte, making the ACC title game again? I'd say at this point, probably not, because it wouldn't surprise me if they went 4-2 over this stretch. And I don't think you're going to get, this year it could be because the Coastal doesn't look very strong, but I think it's going to be tough to win the division if you go 5-3 in the ACC, unless your two losses are Louisville and Syracuse and you manage to only have one loss in the Coastal. So you hold a tiebreaker advantage over everybody else in the division other than Georgia Tech. While this looks like the kind of year that the Coastal could send a 5-3 champ to Charlotte, my guess is it'll still be a team that manages to go 6-2. I think there's still enough possibilities there. I had the records all written down. Yeah, I mean, Carolina's undefeated at 2-0. Georgia Tech is 2-1. Pitt and Duke are both 1-1. And Miami's 0-1. Virginia Tech's already got 2 conference losses. Virginia's already got 3, but I mean, Carolina, Georgia Tech, Pitt, Duke, and Miami all have 1 loss or 0. I'm guessing one of those teams will make it through with only 2 losses. And it might be Carolina. They're 2-0 already. They're the only undefeated team, or at least in terms of conference records, the only undefeated team left in the division. But I think it's probably going to take a 6-2 record in the ACC, and I think Pitt's probably more likely to lose 2 games in the final 6 than they are to only lose 1. It's just my guess, unless this offense takes some serious steps forward. And I can't rule that possibility out because, like I said, I think there are talented players in this group. But based on how they've played thus far, they look like the kind of team that's going to go 4-2 at best over the final 6. And if they really stumble, they could go 3-3. And I would be pretty ugly to sit here and talk about a 7-5 team. BMX says, did they fire Frank yet? BMX, the answer is no. John Christovich says, Dior Johnson was arrested. Pitt has the worst luck with basketball players. Well, yeah, so Dior Johnson, we didn't talk about Dior Johnson. So that situation came out on Friday night, right? We had already done our live show for the week on Wednesday. We had already released the morning Pitt on Friday morning, and I was heading out for a quick Cub Scout overnight camping trip Friday night into Saturday that I would come back from and go to the Virginia Tech game. So I was unable to go live and do a live show. And I mean, there's only so much you can say at that point in the situation, not really knowing any of the details. I don't know how much you can talk during an emergency live stream and say Dior Johnson got arrested. That's bad. And then on the post-game show on Saturday night after the Virginia Tech game, we weren't really going to talk about basketball at that point. It was a football post-game show. And so Monday morning on the morning Pitt, I talked about it. I talked about Dior Johnson. I talked about that situation. Talked about kind of some of the background on the reporting of the situation as it went down on Friday afternoon during the Friday evening news dump, as it sort of felt like. But when it comes down to it, I mean, you say Pitt basketball has the worst luck with players, and I mean, there's probably, I mean, that's true. I mean, to have 3 guys arrested in 3 years, facing felony charges at some point, even though the felonies were later dismissed or reduced in each of the last 2 years, it's definitely not a good look. I don't know if it's bad luck, but it's a bad look. I mean, I'll say that it's bad optics for the program. To the point where Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, is getting asked about it at the ACC tip-off in Charlotte today. That was earlier today, sort of ACC basketball media days. Every coach is there with 1 or 2 players. Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, speaks to everyone. And he was asked about it. That was the situation in Pitt. Now, I don't think he's too focused on the legal issues in the Pitt basketball program. But it's a prominent enough story that, that question gets asked. And it's notable enough, 3 guys arrested in 21 months or whatever it's been. It's notable enough that it's, getting some attention. As far as the whole situation with Dior Johnson, I mean, we'll wait and see what happens. Just kind of the same way with Ethiel Horton, same way with John Hughley. We'll wait and see what happens. And then go from there. If pretty much any of it is true, it seems hard to imagine Dior Johnson staying on the team. If he knew that this was going on, if he had been contacted by police and he didn't say anything to his coach or to anybody at Pitt about it, it's hard to imagine him staying on the team. I'm not going to say, the odds favor him, getting kicked off the team or anything like that, because I don't know. I have no idea what's going on behind the scenes at Pitt right now. I just know Dior Johnson is suspended indefinitely and the team's moving on without him. And now they're down to 11 scholarship players. Now they have a lot of the guys, so there was optimism about what this program could be before Dior Johnson committed to Pitt and ultimately signed. There was optimism about it. There was optimism about bringing Nelly Cummings in to join forces with Jamarius Burton and Nike Sabandi, bringing in Greg Elliott to fill out that group. Obviously, having John Hughley back was a huge boost. Blake Hinson to come in to be the power forward. I think there was optimism about what this team could be, that maybe, just maybe, they could take a big step forward and win more games than they lost. But then you added in Dior Johnson. You added in this high-end talent, this 4-star prospect who was going to be a really, really good guard. And you thought, okay, this might be the piece that puts them over the top. And so I think you can still have some optimism about this season and believe in the potential that this group has just with the additions that they had already made. But Dior Johnson had the chance to make it really, really good, like I say, and push them over the top to even more success. Now he's out until who knows when. And it's anybody's guess how long that's going to be. Let's see. Will says, I think the defense is improving, not as good as it was last year overall, but better at producing turnovers for sure. He goes on to say, DeShields and Kamara are starting to understand their roles and letting their talents shine. So excited for those two. Some of the best pure talent we've seen at linebacker in decades. Interesting. I kind of feel like, they've got how many, I don't have the interception and fumble numbers in front of me. I mean, they've obviously had some big turnovers. There's no question about it. That John Morgan forced fumble the other day when he dropped into coverage and that number 80 for Virginia Tech caught a pass for a first down and on third down, and Morgan just put a shoulder into him and knocked the ball loose. I mean, it was a huge play, huge turnover. I think they probably feel like they should be producing more turnovers than they have. I'm not sure that they're producing more than they did last year. I'd have to compare those numbers, but I get the impression that the defense is disappointed with their overall turnover production, that they feel like they should be doing better at it than they have been. As it relates to Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields, I personally think that both guys have shown quite a bit of improvement over the first 6 games. I think they've gotten quite a bit better. I think Kamara played pretty well on Saturday against Virginia Tech. I think DeShields has made some big plays. And I think those guys, what's interesting to me about those guys, and Kamara more than DeShields because Kamara is playing more than DeShields. I don't think they've necessarily played at a high level, a reliable level, consistently, for all 60 minutes. And they've still had some holes. They still align in the wrong spot, or they get lined up wrong, or take the wrong angle, or fill the wrong gap, or whatever it is. But what those guys, and that's not unnatural for young linebackers, particularly in this defense. I think young outside linebackers can struggle in this defense to make sure they're in the right spot. And if they're not in the right spot, they're going to give up big plays, which I think has happened probably in almost every game this season. But the thing is, the difference between these young linebackers and some of the other young linebackers we've seen who made the same mistakes early in their careers here at Pitt over the last 8 seasons, the difference here is these two guys, Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields, have big play potential. And, we've seen them get sacks. Kamara had a pass breakup. They give him credit for it. Yeah, they give him credit for a pass breakup. It was almost an interception against Virginia Tech. And I'm actually kind of surprised he hasn't gotten a pick yet. I think he's going to put himself in the passing lanes as he continues to familiarize himself with watching offenses and reading keys and preparation and all those things. He's going to be able to put himself in passing lanes, and he's got the athleticism to make those plays, which is, I think, really impressive and striking when you see, like I say, the big play potential that these guys have. And that, to me, is what sets them apart from some of the other young linebackers we've seen. All those guys made mistakes. You think about any of the linebackers who have come through Pitt over the last 8 years, when they're playing for the first time, they make big mistakes. Do you remember Servassier Dennis as a freshman? Who did they play in 2019? Ohio? And he got beat on a wheel route. He got beat so bad, I don't think he played again after that. I mean, he just got crushed. I feel like it was a long pass play on a wheel route, and he just totally misplayed it and just got obliterated on the play. And like I said, I don't think he was on the field on defense again the rest of the season. It's tough for young linebackers, but not all. And Kamara and DeShields are no different. And I mean, they're not necessarily young, but they're young in terms of their on-field experience. The difference here is those guys can really make plays. I think they've got the athleticism, the speed, the size to go out and make big plays, whether it's getting into the backfield and getting sacks, or I think, forcing turnovers, which I think is going to come. I think those two guys, particularly Kamara, because he's playing more, they're going to get some opportunities to make some big plays and force some turnovers. And I think it's going to be exciting to watch those guys over the second half of this season, and then certainly into next year, when potentially they could be your 2 starting outside linebackers, which wouldn't be the worst group, So I think it's going to be exciting to watch those guys. I think it'll be fun. The Panther Room says Jeff Capel experience hasn't been going that great. No, it's been pretty darn bad. There's no question about it. It's the wins aren't there. There are off-field issues or off-court issues. There's locker room, you know, issues. I mean, it's been a mess. It's been a mess, and I think he inherited a big mess. I think it took a long time to clean up the mess that he inherited. I think they were building the program up from even more than he realized they had to build it up from, and it's taken time, and I think most people were willing to give Jeff Capel time to build this program, but it's not. It hasn't come together at all. Like, and any time there's even an slightest indication of progress, it falls apart. Last year they go on a 3-game winning streak, come home and face Georgia Tech on a Saturday afternoon with a decent crowd because people were a little excited. They've won 3 games in a row, and they're playing a lousy Georgia Tech team. People get a little bit interested, and they just got their butts kicked. I mean, it wasn't really. I don't really think it was all that close. I think it was a disappointing game, start to finish, and that's been the case more often than not. I mean, 2 years ago? Was that when they beat Duke 2 years ago? And it was, this Pitt basketball is back and all this stuff. Well, how did that go? I think they fell off a cliff after that. And so, Jeff Capel coming up to year 5 is in an absolutely crucial year for his tenure as the Pitt head basketball coach. I don't know if another bad year would get him fired at the end of the season. I'm not sure. I mean, we talked a lot about that last year, and I'm not sure, what kind of in-season outcomes could lead to off-season changes. Certainly, if they lose a lot again and have more legal issues, which they've already had some, I mean, that's a pretty bad recipe. I feel like there's a sliding, I don't even know if I should go down this path, but I feel like there's a sliding scale in athletics. And this is not specific to Pitt. This is not specific to any one school because they'd all deny that this exists. But I feel like there's a sliding scale for athletics, all right? And let's consider this the middle, all right? And you can, the more winning you have, all right, the more you push the winning side of the abacus, the more off-court issues you can tolerate. You know what I'm saying? And by say you can tolerate, I mean administration, leadership, athletic directors can tolerate more or will tolerate more when you've got more of the winning. Now, if the winning comes down, it becomes harder to tolerate more of the off-field antics, the off-court antics. We talk about Dave Wanstead getting fired, right? And people talk about, well, he had all these guys getting arrested. He did. But if he won the Big East in 2009, if they beat Cincinnati in that game, or if they stopped Connecticut on a 4th and 1 in 2010, or maybe even won the Big East that year, I bet you wouldn't get fired for having those guys arrested. If you win the Cincinnati game in 2009, and then you have those guys, a bunch of arrests in July and August and September of 2010, I bet you he survives until 2011. It's a sliding scale. You can have wins and off-field issues, or you can have not so many wins but not so many off-field issues. But you can't have not so many wins and a bunch of off-field issues, or in this case, off-court issues. And those things just keep mounting, which only makes it easier if we get to the end of this next season and they still lose more games than they win, and they still struggle and only win a couple of ACC games and look pretty bad, So, because you can't have the equation set up like that, where you're losing and your guys are getting in trouble. You can't. Even if the charges get reduced, even if the charges get dismissed, the players still put themselves in a position to even have to deal with that. Like John Hughley's charges get dismissed or reduced or whatever it was, he was still in that situation. Ethiel Horton's charges get dismissed or reduced or whatever it was, he was still in that situation. If this Dior Johnson thing goes away, if it turns out to not be what it's been claimed to be, he still put himself in that position, which is questionable judgment. And I don't mean that as any a character slight. I think these are young guys, college guys, and I think they've made bad decisions. But it calls into question judgment and focus and all those kinds of things. You can't have losses and off-court issues. You can't have that. You need to balance it out one way or the other. And Capel's going to need to balance it out this year with more wins, I think. Patrick DeSantis says, oddly, the Tennessee game felt more winnable in the moment than the Georgia Tech game, to me at least. Yeah, the Georgia Tech game, I don't remember what point it was. I think even into the third quarter, I was thinking to myself, okay, this is a mess. This is a bad game. They're playing really poorly on offense. They're still going to win, but it's going to be a week of complaining about Frank Cignetti and Keaton Slovis, and legitimately so. And it's going to be a week of questions about this offense and how good they can be and how many games they can actually win. But they're still going to pull it off. It's going to be an ugly win, but they're still going to pull it off. And I think even once it got into the fourth quarter, thought it's going to be an ugly win, but they can still pull it off. And I'm not sure at the point for me when the wave broke. You know what I mean? Where the wave crashed, and it was like, oh, God, they're going to lose this game. You know, it was sort of lingering thought in the third quarter of this might go wrong. I remember, I'll tell you when I remember, and this is a memory that's always stuck with me because it's one of my earliest memories, at least as it relates to covering Pitt sports. It must have been the spring of 2006. NCAA tournament, Pitt played in Detroit, Auburn Hills, and they played Kent State in the first game. And the winner of that game was likely to face Kansas, right? So they beat Kent State and got ready to play Kansas. Kansas was the night game. Except Kansas was playing against Bradley. And Bradley won. And, oh, geez, Pitt's going to have to play this Bradley team. This will be interesting. And I remember watching the game and thinking, wow, Bradley's really giving him a real game. I mean, Pitt's like losing right now. I'm like, yeah, but they'll figure out a way. They'll pull it out. It'll be all right. They'll get to, you know, this was back when like when Pitt was going to the Sweet 16 all the time, and people were complaining because Pitt would always lose in the Sweet 16. So my God, Pitt's going to get to the Sweet 16. And I remember sitting there on Press Road at Auburn Hills, at the Palace. I think it was the Palace. And I'm sitting there, and yeah, of course it was the Palace. And I'm watching this game, and there was a media timeout, and Pitt was down. And I was still like thinking, well, they'll figure it out. This, talent will take over, Sam Young and all this stuff. And a Pitt official like walked past, and I was like, hey, and they gave me this look like, ugh. And I remember thinking, wow, he's really like nervous or something. He seems like he thinks they're going to lose this game. Of course, we all know what happened in that game. And I always think back to that when we're watching games like this, like that Georgia Tech game where, where you have to just sort of stop and say, wait, let's look at what's actually happening here. Because what's actually happening is not, they'll be okay. What's actually happening is they're losing. And to this point, they have shown no inclination or no indication of an ability to come back and win. Like you can sit back and say, oh, they'll figure it out. They'll have like one or two drives that'll just take care of it. And then they'll get out of this. It'll be ugly, but they'll move on. But you have to actually look at what you're watching. And what you're watching is a team that has no chance of moving the ball. And they didn't move the ball until the final like two drives of the game. And whether or not there's something to take from those two drives, and we debated that over and over again, I don't know. But what you actually saw was a team that had no chance of moving the ball, was unable to move the ball. And when that happens, you got to acknowledge what's actually going on here, which is they're going to lose. And so I'm kind of with you. I mean, that moment sort of, it dawned on me, and I kept thinking they might be able to pull it off. But it did sort of dawn on me too, Patrick, that, at a certain point, oh God, they're going to lose this game. That's going to be a mess. Because I've often said, the thing that I'm always thinking during games is how it's going to impact the message boards. And so when I'm watching a game like that Georgia Tech game, I'm thinking to myself, the boards are going to be an absolute mess this week. That's what I end up thinking. Let's see. We got a super chatter here jumping in. Tony Sadaka says, how crazy is it to start the redshirt freshman instead of Keaton Slovis? I'm not there yet. I think Nate Yarnell showed some real promise in that game at Western Michigan. I thought he played well. He threw the ball well. He seemed to make good decisions. He also wasn't called to make many. He only dropped back 13 times. That was like half as many as Keaton Slovis dropped back against Virginia Tech, a game where they handed the ball off and ran for 320 yards. They ran the ball like 50-some times in that Western Michigan game. You're not going to be able to do that in every ACC game. You're not going to be able to protect your redshirt freshman quarterback like that in every ACC game. And so, I liked what I saw. I'm not going to I'm not going to read too much into what I saw. But I do think there could come a point where you have to realistically consider it and say, this might be the better option here. We might need to put the kid in and give him a chance. I don't think we're there yet. I think it's going to take a while. It might take Keaton Slovis in the offense costing them another game before a change like that would even be considered. For now, I think Slovis still gives them the best chance to win. Yarnell's intriguing, though. I like the idea of Yarnell being the starting quarterback next year. Don't know if he's ready for it this year. Chris Gates, our guy from Chris Gates Fitness, right? I talked about him. Says, Chris, between Kenny Pickett, Jordan Addison, and Israel Abanikanda, Pitt has had some of the top offensive skill players in the country the last couple of years. What type of recruiting impact will that have? Now, this is a good question. It's an interesting question because I think when you look at the recruiting so far, like this 2023 recruiting class, as I look at it, I think there's good players on both sides of the ball. I really like Lamar Seymour, the wide receiver. Kenny Johnson, I think, is a good wide receiver. But I still think, Dadrian Zipperer, another good wide receiver. And I like some of these offensive linemen as well. But I think the talent that intrigues me the most, the talent that I think looks the best, is still on that defensive side of the ball. I think Jordan Bass might be the best recruit in this class, a linebacker from Virginia. I think we have him severely underrated as a 5.63 star. He should be much better than that, but I think he's a really good player. I think Shadarian Harrison as a defensive back is really good. I think Isaiah Neal, the defensive tackle, is really good. Antonio Kamen is really good as a defensive end. Bryce Pollock is a stud defensive back out of Georgia. I really like Rasheem Biles as a big athlete, almost a Bengali Kamara type, coming out of Ohio as a safety who's going to play outside linebacker at Pitt. Braylon Lovelace from Leechburg is really intriguing. Another athlete who's going to play outside linebacker. Jesse Anderson, who I mentioned, I think is going to be really good as a DB. I like some of these offensive guys. But again, the talent seems to be on the defensive side of the ball. And even when they were involved with, Hakeem Williams, which we talked about a lot, it was more about Taekwon Underwood than it was about having had Jordan Addison. So it should help. It should put them more on the radar with some of these guys. I'm not sure that it necessarily has translated that individual success. Part of it too is that, you had Kenny Pickett, Jordan Addison really excel last year, and the offensive coordinator and the wide receivers coach are gone. Now, I think that the success those guys had last year was more about Pickett and Addison individually than was about, having Whipple and Brennan Marion. But still, I think it's a little harder to say, come in and be the next Kenny Pickett, come in and be the next Jordan Addison when you don't have the coach who coordinated the offense that, led to those guys producing like they did. So it's tricky. I don't think it has had a huge impact so far. I'll tell you where it probably happened the most, and I'll tell you where I think this, Kenny Pickett being a Heisman Trophy finalist, Jordan Addison being a Biletnikoff Award winner, now Izzy Abanikanda with all his exploits and awards this week after his performance against Virginia Tech. Where I think it had the biggest impact is just in terms of name recognition. It maybe made Pitt a little more noticeable, a little more relevant than the Panthers would have been otherwise for some recruits. It may cause guys to take another look at Pitt. Be like, whoa, Heisman finalist, he was from Pitt? Whoa, Biletnikoff Award winner, he was from Pitt? And then you look into it a little bit more. Maybe, they're in the ACC. Oh, they won 11 games last year. They're ACC champs. Oh, this might be a program I want to look at. And I think they had a really good recruiting list this spring. You look at guys who came and took visits, young, kids going into their senior year, but also guys going into their junior year and sophomore year. I think they had a really good spring recruiting period. And I think that reflects on all the success, the 11-win season, the ACC championship, the Heisman Trophy finalists, the Biletnikoff Award, and all that stuff. I think that's where it probably has an impact more than maybe some of the guys they've landed. I don't know that the offensive recruiting has taken a big step forward overall. But I think you maybe got more sort of recognition and eyeballs on your program, offense and defense, with the success that those guys had. So that's kind of what I see coming out of it. But that's just that's me. We'll see if anything turns up in the future. All right, let's see. Will says, I genuinely believe this team can still make a run in the back half of the season if we can come out of the bye healthy and firing on all cylinders. The college football playoff is off the table, but the ACC championship game is still there. Yeah, it is. It is still there. It's still very much in reach. This division does not look unwinnable. I think none of these final 6 games looks unwinnable. Now, the Georgia Tech game didn't look unwinnable. Pitt can go out and win all 6 of these games. They can also go 5-1 or 4-2 or 3-3. I don't think they'll do worse than that. But until the offense becomes a consistent source of production, I should say until the passing game becomes a consistent source of production for the offense, it's hard to predict very much. All right, try and get through as many of these as we can. Royce Beacom says, what is the latest injury status of Haba Baldonado and Servassier Dennis? I think those guys will be fine. I don't have anything definitive, but I expect those guys to be back for the Louisville game. That's my expectation. Let's see. The Panther Room says, I hope Pitt uses the offense they did against West Virginia in the first half of the Tennessee game. I understand handing the ball off to a top running back against lesser quality teams, but not against North Carolina and Miami. Yeah, the run is going to be part of it. I think Izzy Abanikanda has definitely earned his work. The run game is going to be a big part of this offense. The pass game is what needs to take a step forward. And I think it was better in the West Virginia game and the first half of the Tennessee game than it has been since then. It needs to regain that form and then step up from there. Because where they were in that first game and a half was a good starting spot, and it needed to improve from there, and instead it hasn't. It's gone backward. So they need to work to get back to that level and then push it even above. They're going to be able to run the ball on some of these teams. They're not going to be able to run on all of them. So, they're going to try, but they're going to need to be able to pass. Let's see. The Panther Room says, if the Louisville quarterback plays in this game, this will be a real tough game. Preseason, I picked this as a loss. Yeah, Malik Cunningham missed this past week's game. We'll see if he's back in 2 weeks. He's had concussion-like symptoms or something like that. It's tough to tell. This defense, I think, generally has been pretty good against running quarterbacks, but Jeff Sims, certainly from Georgia Tech, got some runs against them. And some of that is going to be due to some of the youth and inexperience at outside linebacker. Similarly, the defensive ends have to be able to get to the quarterback. So we'll see what Cunningham is able to do. We'll see if, number one, if he plays, and that certainly would be a game changer if he does or doesn't. That's going to affect how Pitt approaches the game. And then we'll see what kind of impact he can make. They don't look very good. Louisville doesn't look like a very good team this year. It should be a game Pitt should be able to win, but they're going to be on the road, and obviously they have their own offensive issues to solve too. All right, let's scroll down and see. John Christofich says Frank Signetti's conservative play calling cost us the game against Georgia Tech. I'm not sure it was play calling. I'm not sure that it was play calling. I don't think the play calling was perfect, and I'm not going to say the play calling wasn't a problem, but I would say that execution was a major issue as well. I don't think Yeah, I mean, I can't put that all on play calling. I can't. When you look at how they played, I mean, when you look at the offense overall, it wasn't just play calling. I think there were a lot of problems. And I think Keaton Slovis is the issue. Let's see. Ryan Kaminsky, maybe we'll finish on this, says the coaching staff isn't getting it done. Beyond the Georgia Tech loss, they struggled with an average to bad West Virginia, Virginia Tech, and even the defense had some WTF moments versus Rhode Island. Well, it's funny because the coaching staff is largely the same as the one last year that went 11-3. Now, obviously, the big change was the offensive coordinator, but I would maintain, and this is probably my biggest point when we talk about last year versus this year. You know what the biggest difference is between last year and this year? It's not Mark Whipple to Frank Signetti. It's not Brendan Marion to Taekwon Underwood. It's going from Kenny Pickett to Keaton Slovis. Going from Jordan Addison to the guys who are replacing him. And that's not to say that this year's guys can't get it done. But the reason Pitt won 11 games last year and won the ACC championship is because they had a great quarterback and an elite wide receiver. They had two guys who could carry the team. Two guys who could put the team on their back and win games. If you put Jordan Addison on this team right now, they would be no worse than 5-1, and they probably would be 6-0. I fully believe that, even with Keaton Slovis. As much as I want to say about Slovis, I bet he pulls the trigger more on passes to Addison because Addison makes those plays. He's a special player. He was an elite player, and he's the reason, along with Kenny Pickett, that Pitt had the success that they had. That's the big difference between last year and this year. It was Kenny Pickett playing at that level. It was Jordan Addison playing at that level. And it was particularly where those guys were, because that last year was a lot better than 2019. It was a lot better than 2020. And it was a lot better than 2018. You look at 3 other years of Kenny Pickett as the starting quarterback. In his 5th season, overall, his 4th season as a starter, he played at a really high level. He had the experience, and he knew what he was doing, and he looked comfortable on the field. He had pretty good pass protection, and he had the best wide receiver in the country. That's why they won last year. And so you talk about the coaching staff isn't getting it done this year. Like I said, I mean, I have some question marks. I have some questions about the defense when it's largely the same personnel and the same coaching staff on that side of the ball. That one is a little bit more difficult to understand. You really only change the outside linebackers. But you have the entire same coaching staff from last year, and your other 9 starters are the same, or guys who played either as starters or top reserves last season. So you could say the coaching staff isn't getting it done, and I mean certainly I think there's enough blame to go around for everyone when you have some of the games they've had. But to me, it's always about the players. I mean, I think the players make the biggest difference. And a player's development and where he is and how he plays and how he understands the game and all those things. I think that's what makes the biggest difference. All right, listen, tomorrow morning, Thursday, we have a very special morning Pitt. If you're watching this after the fact, you're going to have to, assume that I'm talking about something that's already been loaded and published because it's going to come out first. But the morning Pitt in youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com for Thursday is a pretty good one. I'm excited about that. I'm excited for you guys to see it and check it out. I think you'll really enjoy it. We got a special guest and really great conversation there. So look forward to that right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Listen, make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you keep up on everything we're doing. You can turn on notifications, and then you'll get alerts sent to your phone every time we release a new video, every time we go live, whether it's for the Wednesday night Panther-Lair show like this right here, or when we go live after the games on Saturdays. Who knows what time we'll be live after the Louisville game. It's an 8 p.m. kick. I'd like to say we'll be starting at midnight. I hope we're starting at midnight. I don't know if we'll be starting at midnight. But if you subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on your notifications, you'll get a little alert that shows up on your phone and says, hey, Panther-Lair is going to talk about the game. Time to get online and get your drink and get on the live chat, get on the live stream. It works out really well like that. So like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure you check out Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Make sure you check it out. The message boards are always humming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Thanks to everybody who joined the live stream tonight. It's been a lot of fun having the conversation. As always, we'll do it again after the game. Well, I mean, we'll do it again next Wednesday night, and then we'll do it after the Louisville game a few days after that. But stay tuned right here to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com for all of our exclusive Pitt video content, including the Morning Pit, which comes out every morning, Monday through Friday. So thanks again to everybody who checks out the video. Hope you have a great Wednesday. We're heading toward the ends of the week, coming up to the weekend. Looking forward to it. We will talk to you again Thursday morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.